Let's talk grades and grading. The way that your final course grade is determined in this course is likely going to be very different from how your course grades are determined in your other courses, unless those other courses are with me. We're going to use a fairly unconventional grading system for this course, but just because it's unconventional doesn't mean you have to have any hesitation about it or have any fear of it. Because I really think this grading system that we're going to be using, it works in students' favor. And I think that because that's what they tell me. At the end of every semester, I always ask students, should I go to a more conventional, more traditional method for calculating course grades, or should I keep this grading system? And gosh, almost without exception, students say, no, keep this grading system. I just did this a couple of weeks ago as we finished up the semester. And out of 3 classes, there was one student who said, no, go to something more traditional. And so when I ask the folks why keep this grading system, they typically say the same kinds of things. They say, I never think about my grade in this course. I always know exactly where I'm at, and I know exactly what I need to do to get the grade for the course that I want. And I can focus on my work rather than being focused on getting a particular grade. I know what I have to do to get the grade I want. I don't even have to think about it. And that's sort of reflected by the fact that I never, ever have students asking me, well, what can I do to make this a B? Or what can I do to get an A in this course? I haven't been asked a question like that for years, okay? So the grading system is unconventional, but it's also really working in your favor. Now, there's a couple of things to take note of here as we get into this. One is that you're going to be completing individual assignments, individual thought primers, individual quizzes, individual ethical inquiries, and none of those assignments is going to receive a letter grade. Okay, so you're not going to submit, it's not ever going to be the case that you submit a thought primer to me and I say, wow, bang up job, this gets an A. Or, this is okay, it's good enough, it gets a C+. Okay, that's not going to happen. The other thing that's not going to happen is that your assignment categories aren't going to interact with one another. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. Let's say you're taking an English class and you've got these 3 assignment categories. You've got your class participation, which constitutes, let's say, 10% of your final course grade. And you've got these 4 short essay assignments that are each constituting 10% of your final course grade. And then you've got this gigantic research project that's worth 50% of your course grade. Although that would be cruel to make one assignment worth 50% of your course grade. Anyway, okay. So if you're in that situation, maybe you're looking at your performance on those 4 short essay assignments that were each worth 10% of your grade, and you're like, oh my gosh, I really kind of blew it on those 4 low value essay assignments that are worth 40% of my grade. So I'm going to rock it on this research project that's worth 50% of my course grade in hopes that performing really well on that assignment kind of compensates for my poorer performance on the low grade assignments. I'm going to hope it kind of drags up my grade a little bit to compensate for my poor performance. Okay, that's not going to happen in our course. Okay, you have these 3 assignment categories. You have your thought primers, you have your quizzes, and you have your ethical inquiries. What you do on your ethical inquiries is not going to have any bearing on the role that your thought primers play in determining your final course grade. What you do on your quizzes is not going to have any effect on what you do for your inquiries and your thought primers. So you can't do really well in one area hoping that it brings you up in another area. Okay, so let's look at what this actually looks like when we put it into our grading system. All right, so you've got these 3 assignment categories. I was thinking this morning, I've been teaching for college for over 30 years, and just to hear that come out of my mouth it's kind of depressing. It's unreal. But at any rate, at this point, I have expectations about what students should be doing in a particular course to be successfully learning. Okay? In other words, I can look at your performance and I can determine whether or not it's really good. Okay? I can look at what you do and say, I have expectations at this point about what it looks like for a student to do okay in a course. And I can look at what you've done and say, wow, you kind of went beyond those expectations for what it looks like to just do okay. You exceeded my expectations for what satisfactory performance looks like. Or maybe I look at your performance and I say, okay, not lighting the world on fire, but I think you've demonstrated that you've successfully learned this material. You've met my expectations. Or like, oh, really close. You nearly meet my expectations. Or worse, like, you know what? I have this idea for what it looks like when a student is successful in this course and you didn't meet those expectations, all right? So you're thinking to yourself, well, great, dude, you've got expectations. How does that help me determine what it is that I need to do in order to exceed these nebulous expectations that you're talking about that are so far just in your head? All right, so let's take each one of these performance descriptors, exceeds expectations, meets expectations, and we'll just assign them a representative letter. So E represents exceeds, M represents meets, and let's think about these as they relate to your thought primers. If we get to the end of the semester and I'm looking at your average score for your thought primers and it's at least 80%, I'm going to say bang up job. You went above and beyond what I think is the minimum, okay? You hit that 80% mark. You hit that 90% mark. You hit that 100% mark. You have exceeded my expectations. But if we look at the grade for your thought primers and we see, okay, you got 75, you got somewhere between 70 and 79% on your thought primers, we'd say, like, yeah, that's okay. You know, again, not lighting the world on fire, but this is appropriate. This is average performance. And we'll say that's like an M. But if it's between 65 and 69%, we're going to say, you know what, that's an N. That nearly meets expectations, but it kind of falls below that baseline for satisfactory performance. And if it's less than 65%, we're going to say, like, you know what, that does not meet expectations. All right. And we might say the same thing about your quizzes. If the average is at least 80% on your quizzes, we'd say, like, bang up, that exceeds expectations. If it's between 70 and 79, meets expectations. And we could say the same thing about your ethical inquiries, okay? So that's what it means to exceed or meet or not meet my expectations as it relates to your thought primers, your quizzes, and your ethical inquiries. And so again, you're sitting there thinking to yourself, okay, this makes no sense to me. What happens with these E, M, N's, and D's? Because I don't get those letters on my transcript at the end of the course. I get an A minus, a B, that kind of a grade. All right. So let's associate combinations of these E, M, N's, and D's with particular letter grades. So we'll say that if the three categories of your assignments all have E's, they've exceeded expectations in your ethical inquiries, your quizzes, and your thought primers, that's going to translate to an A on your transcript. If you exceeded expectations in two of the assignment areas and met expectations in another, that's going to get you an A minus on your transcript, and so on and so forth. So let's say we get to the end of the semester, we look in Canvas and we see, like, hey, you got 82% on your thought primers, you got 86% on your ethical inquiries, and your quiz average was 78%. What's the combination of letters that are the E, M, N, and D that's going to correlate to these performance indicators? And if you said EEM, you're right. So we say EEM, if this were your final scores at the end of the semester, you get an A minus in the course. Now here's where you can see this grading system is really working in your favor, right? Because in none of the three assignment categories did you get above 90%, which is usually what's associated with an A grade. Okay, so you were able to get an A minus in this course without ever even breaking that 90% percentage threshold on any one of your assignment categories. Let's say we get to the end of the semester and we've got 90% on our thought primers, our quizzes are 75%, our inquiries are 79%. Now we're looking at an EMM, and that's going to translate to a B grade. All right, now let's look at this. Blew it out of the park on thought primers with 96%, quizzes got 82%, but the inquiries got that dreaded 67%. It didn't rise into this threshold of 70% or higher. It's right here in this N. Okay, so the combination here is EEN. We've got 2 exceeds and 1 nearly meets expectations. And you'll notice that that's not included in our little grading key over here. So what letter grade does that translate to? All right. An N in any one area drops your course grade to a C as long as one of the other 2 areas is an E. Okay, so in this case, we do have it that at least one of the other 2 areas is exceeding. And so if this was the combination of percentage values for our 3 categories of assignments, we'd wind up with a C. So you can see it's really, really important to make sure that you're getting into that 70% range on all of your assignment categories. And there is no reason why you shouldn't be getting into that 80% range. We get a lot of A's coming out of this course. because people make sure that they complete their assignments. Now look at this dreaded combination. We have 88% on the thought primer, so that's pretty good. We have 66% on our quizzes and 68% on our inquiries, which would translate to an E, exceeds expectations in the thought primers, and then nearly meets expectations in the other two areas. And that's going to bring in this rule, an N in 2 or more areas, or an N in combination with 2 M's drops your course grade to a D. So we definitely want to make sure we don't have 2 areas that are falling below that 70% threshold. And then finally, look at this one. Thought primers are 95%, quizzes are 99%, and inquiries, 62%. That's clearly down here in the less than 65% range. That's a D. That's going to give us a combination of exceeds, doesn't meet. And that's a dreaded combination, because a D in any one area drops your course grade to a D. And a D in 2 or more areas drops your course grade to an F. Okay, so all of this information is included in your course syllabus, which I encourage you to download, because you're going to be answering some quiz questions related to different grading scenarios here in the next couple of weeks, to make sure that you've got a clear idea about how the grading system works and what exactly you need to do in this course to walk away with the grade that you want. Okay?